Hey everyone, and welcome to Tactical Ink, your portal to the captivating realm of all things Lorcana. I'm Bradley.
I'm Alex. Into the Inklands is a week away from hitting the shelves, and we're seeing the new card type locations. So this poses a question: what will be new in the future?
And looking at other card games and how they've evolved through the years, we may have an idea of some of the things that Lorcana may do heading forward. Little disclaimer, many cards in this video aren't real, and were created using vintageccg.com. So with that out of the way, let's discuss some of these future ideas that we could think of, and start off with different ink types and card types.
One idea we could think of was Colorless Ink. If you've ever played Magic the Gathering, you may know some about Colorless. It could be used in any deck and can use any type of mana color to be played. Creatures of colorless type were usually lower stats and have lifts or effects, and for the most part, they're only good for artifacts, the magic equivalent of Lorcana's items. Take that same idea and apply it to Lorcana. This would be an ink color that could be used in any deck and wouldn't apply to the two ink combinations.
So I'm not the biggest fan of this idea. I like the route Lorcana has been doing, just keeping each color doing its own thing. And I feel like if you add colors into the mix, it's not going to make decks feel different enough. Or if they did it, make all the colorless ones uninkable, so that it makes it harder to add to your deck. Now if they add a 7th color that feels different than the rest or something, then I could see that. But that would be hard for them to pull off, especially since we've already got so many cards of each color already.
Well, Lorcana's done a really good job of keeping things really well balanced, and I think this is just something that could throw the balance off.
Another future possibility is dual ink cards. This would be cards that have two different colored inks, so they could only be played in specific decks. Many dual inks could look something like this: Amber Emerald character that discards things from your opponent's hand. Something that both of these colors do. And this is another idea that I'm not the biggest fan of. I feel like opening packs is so much fun trying to find the cards you need for your deck. And there are already 15 color combinations, so that means you'd be taking away so much of a new set to bring this in. But a better way of possibly doing this is something we'll talk about next, but we'll get into that later.
Yeah, I think that making a card that is multiple colors really limits your color combinations and the creativity that you can have in a deck like you have right now. So I'm not a huge fan of this idea either.
And next is team up cards. There are a lot of ways that something like this could work, and this could be something that could be single colored or two colored ink cards. For example, have a card named Shere Khan and Scar with both character images on it. Let's make it Ruby and Steel just for this example. Maybe the keyword can be called Team Up or Ally or something like that, and let it say, you can only play this card by placing this card on top of a card named Shere Khan and a card named Scar. So it'd be kind of like Shift, but you have to have two characters on the field instead. This could be powerful cards with powerful effects, since it takes so much to bring them out.
We've seen something like this in a lot of other card games, and a lot of the time these things look amazing and like it would just completely dominate the game, but it takes so much to set up that really it's just a really cool thing to happen when you can make it happen, that you honestly just deserve the win at that point. And you can even implement an extra deck or something like that, something like the trading card game Yu-Gi-Oh! This is a deck that can only have these team-up cards in them. And then team-up cards would go in your extra deck and be played from there at any time, as long as you controlled the cards needed.
And this is something I would actually like to see, and probably just for the artworks more than anything. Seeing Shere Khan with Scar, Tarzan with Mowgli, Baymax and Stitch together, it would just be amazing to me.
It'd be really cool to see some of these really iconic figures from these movies paired together. So also, when we're looking forward to the future, there's possibility of other Disney properties entering into Lorcana. As of right now, Lorcana only includes characters from Disney Animation Studios. However, the door is open for more, especially since Ravensburger's other game, Villainous, has used Pixar, Marvel, and Star Wars in their games.
Yeah, and let's look at one of these, Pixar. They currently have 27 different films that they could pull from, with characters from Toy Story, Cars, Finding Nemo, and more. And I think this would be a welcome addition to the game. They could even add new mechanics to the game as they add these new properties to the team as well. I could even see a whole set dedicated to Pixar to bring them into the game. Gimme Ernesto de la Cruz, a card that could steal songs, that'd be great. Or a Buzz Lightyear that can move to locations for free once per turn. The possibilities are limitless.
Yeah, Pixar is definitely the one that I would be the most excited to see come into Lorcana in the future. But I'd also be really excited about the next one that we're going to look at, Marvel and Star Wars. This would enter a plethora of new characters. You have superpowered heroes and villains on one side, and force-wielding, spaceship battling Jedis and Sith on the other side. Marvel could maybe introduce mechanics to make your character superpowered, or even flip cards as your Jean Grey can exert to turn into the Phoenix, even having 2 different colors. Star Wars could introduce a spaceship mechanic, maybe something that could be similar to vehicles in Magic the Gathering, or even a force mechanic that could be like Singer.
And while I love Marvel characters and the idea of Star Wars, I think I would only be excited for this on one condition. If they use the animated versions of them from like Spider-Man cartoon, X-Men 97 cartoon, the What If series, Star Wars Clone Wars, and more. We'll get into that more in our next section as we talk about live action Disney movies. But one note I have here is, Marvel has its own game in Marvel Snap. And they also made a deal with Wizards of the Coast to collaborate with them for Magic the Gathering. And Star Wars has their own card game, Star Wars Unlimited. So it's possible, but I don't think we're going to be seeing these for a long time, if at all.
When we're thinking about all these as well, it's also important to remember the actual lore of Lorcana and where the story might be heading. I just don't know if Marvel and Star Wars would fit with where this story is going, and if it might just seem out of place. Moving on, there's also several live-action Disney movies, such as Pirates of the Caribbean, Tron, Mighty Ducks, and more. We could really see the Pirates deck theme really increase with a property like Pirates of the Caribbean.
And the same thing with this, unless they're animated versions of them, I think they should just stay away from these live-action properties. Tron does have a cartoon that is animated, and so does Mighty Ducks, even though it's completely different from the live-action movie. But the animation just works with the ink, and just doesn't make sense if it's live-action, in my opinion, if they do live-action cards.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So, back in 2019, Disney obtained several of Fox assets. So, movies such as Ice Age, Rio, Ferdinand. This gives Ravensburger so much more to work with. However, I don't know about you, while some of these movies may be great movies, they just don't have the same feel to me as a lot of Disney movies. And it's a road that they could go down, but honestly, I would rather them stay away.
Maybe sometime the very distant future when Lorcana's been out for years and years, but I think we have so much material to work with already, and then if you were to bring Pixar into the picture, I just don't see a need for these movies yet, but maybe at some point.
And honestly, I thought when the first set came out, and we were seeing multiple characters, and now these other sets are coming out, and we're seeing the same character being released over and over with different artworks, I thought it would get stale already. But honestly, seeing all these Elsas, seeing all these Peter Pan, seeing all these hooks, it's actually kind of cool, and if they keep using the same characters, I think it's fine.
Moving on to our next section, we're looking at multiplayer formats. Whether it be team up or more people playing against each other, I think there's a lot of possibilities here.
And the first one is just 3 or more players playing against each other in a free-for-all. There's already a lot of people playing this way, but there's not an official way of playing this yet. And in the past, Alex and I have played in 3-player games, and it was fun. However, I wonder if the more players you have, should the lore marker go up or down, and other things that probably need play testing. And also think of another free-for-all format, which is popular in Magic the Gathering, something like Commander, or as you old school fans know it as Elder Dragon Highlander. Could Lorcana come out with something of a format that's similar to that? down the road where you have one of each card in your 100 card deck, and maybe you have Floodborns as your commander, it could be intriguing.
Yeah, and doing the free-for-all is probably the most straightforward method of a multiplayer, and it seems like the developers have multiplayer in mind with the way that some of these cards are written, where it says each opponent discards, or things like that, or deal damage to each opponent. There's several cards that are already like this, and I believe this is a road they may go down with the free-for-all. Another format idea, though, is also doing teams, like maybe a 3 versus 3 team. However, there's a catch to this. Each player can only choose one color.
So one team may have Ruby, Amethyst, and Sapphire, while the other team has Amethyst, Steel, and Emerald. Cards like Maximus Palace Horse that has support could work on any of your allies' characters, and cards like Grab Your Swords hurt all your opponents. And every team shares a lore counter of 30. Teams play their turn all at the same time. This is a format I thought about a long time ago, actually when Chapter 1 was still fresh and out, and I thought it'd be a very interesting to test out. I just like the idea of using these amazing cards and putting a new spin on the game to see what cards would shine in this format. For example, cards like Ursula Power Hungry, her effect hitting each opponent and you drawing 3 cards, I think that would just be awesome.
Yeah, when we played multiplayer together and I was using Prince John, he can do some crazy things with card draw when you have every opponent discarding all kinds of things. It can be really interesting to be working with someone else in this 3 versus 3 instead of it just being you on your own. I think it would be a cool idea. The last format idea that we have is called Arch Enemy. This would be a 3 versus 1. How this would work is that the team of 3 players each choose a color and play their decks with that single color. These players all play their turn at the same time, and their lore counter must get to 30 to win, just like the format from above. The catch is, though, their deck can have 0 villains in their deck.
And yeah, that's because the single player can use any number of colors. However, their deck can only have villains in their deck, and also actions, items, and locations. Also, the villain has to only get to 20 lore, while his opponents have to get to 30. And there's one more catch. There are Arch Enemy cards. So if you've played Magic the Gathering, they have a format called Arch Enemy. And if you've played that, you'll know what I'm talking about. These are cards that are specific to this game type. At the beginning of every villain's turn, the villain will play one of these randomly. These could range in effects from giving you 3 extra ink until the end of the turn, banishing the character, or even playing an action from your hand for free. And this format wouldn't be a competitive format, but just a format to enjoy with your friends.
Another topic we want to address that we've seen a lot of players asking: will there be a side deck in matches? A side deck is a certain number of cards that you can't use in the game. However, after the first game of a match, you may swap out the cards in your deck to make your deck better against the opposing deck. This is usually in like a best 2 out of 3.
And I'm kind of back and forth on this, just don't really know. On one hand, I like the idea of, instead of running my evasive counters like You Can Fly, Corella DeVille, and Jafar, just putting them away until I face an evasive deck, and then swap them out with my side deck. However, I think that kind of takes away from the deck building aspect of it, and I believe your deck needs to be prepared for all the threats and build the deck where it still runs consistently and functionally, even adding those cards. And if they did release a side deck, I would hope it would be like a maximum 5 to 8 cards, so it wouldn't affect the match that much, because if I'm playing an evasive deck and I have a side deck of like 20 cards and they're all against evasive, my deck will change completely and it may be too much for my opponent to handle, even though he just wiped the floor with me the game before.
I completely agree. I would like it to stay the way that it is, somewhat simpler, but the game is just already fairly balanced in my opinion, and being able to build a deck that works in all situations is pretty feasible. So having these side decks would just really change the whole meta, and I don't care for the idea of it at the moment. So one more thing that we want to look at is some basic game mechanics that could happen that we've seen in other trading card games.
Yeah, and one is different types of win conditions. We've seen in certain card games where if you run out of cards in your deck, if you have a card on the field, it may make you win the game instead of losing. There's also ones where if you played a card twice, you win the game. There's a lot of different things that, in different routes, I see Lorcana, how they can do this. And I feel like they will eventually release more and more ways for win conditions.
I'm not huge on the idea of having different win conditions other than just gaining lore, but one thing that I've liked that they've already started doing is having different ways to gain lore besides just questing. And I'd be curious to see if there's more ways to gain lore that keep coming out. Looking at the mill strategy, milling, if you're not aware, is where you try to deck out your opponent to where they don't have any cards left in their deck to draw, causing them to lose. We see this a little bit already, trying to use a whole new world a bunch of times, or make your opponent draw a bunch of extra cards, like with somebody like Donald Duck, Perfect Gentleman. But there's really not a way to build a whole deck around this yet. It would be a neat strategy to see being implemented even further than it is now.
Yeah, and there's also self-mill. You see that in a lot of games where you want cards to be discarded from your own deck and go into your discard pile. And if we have things that return stuff from your discard to play, I could see self-mill becoming something as well. That way it fuels those cards by adding stuff from your deck into your discard pile, and then the cards that bring stuff back to play has more options in your discard pile. Or even the new Chernobog. If you have self-mill, you can add a lot more characters into your discard pile, making his cost even lower and getting him out even quicker.
Something else I'd be interested in seeing are something that you could maybe call ink dorks. Basically, you hear the term mana dorks in other card games like Magic, where you have this one mana character that their basic ability is just to add more mana to your mana pool, or in Lorcana, in your ink pool. We see this a little bit right now with the new card Pluto Friendly Pooch, where his ability says you pay one ink less for the next character you play this turn, but it's specifically to characters. I'd be curious to see if we end up getting someone that says add one ink to your ink pool for the rest of this turn. Something like that. That would be a major game changer.
Another game mechanic is tokens. This is where an effect causes you to bring out creatures that are not in your deck, basically, or even items or something like that. For example, there could be a card, for example, named Roger from Disney's 101 Dalmatians, and when he comes in play, you can put into play a Dalmatian token, and this token would maybe have 1 strength, 1 willpower, who knows, it just whatever, but basically it would just create a token character that's not from your deck. And this is something that I kind of hope they stay away from, just because tokens can get a little crazy, it can style out games, the board can get pretty bonkers with all the cards on the field. There's just a lot going on. If they do it, I hope they just kind of keep it chill and not absolutely insane like Magic has done with a lot of cards.
Tokens can be very messy. Some of these ideas at first glance might seem like they'd just be so overpowered, but if it's done the right way, it could be okay. For example, with tokens, I don't believe if they did this, they should give them any sort of lore. It should just be some basic 1/1 character, something like that. Not something that you go ahead and rack up 30 of these tokens and then quest and win the game. Another one, probably seemingly very powerful, would be the ability to gain control of your opponent's characters or items. One example that I think would be really neat is the song I Want to Be Like You from the Jungle Book. Being able to, maybe it would just be for the rest of this turn that you control one character or item. Maybe it'd be you can control a character or item with ink cost 2 or less. or that you can't quest with them. There'd have to be some sort of a downside to where you can't just control something permanently. That would just be too powerful. But it would be really cool to be able to see this where you take something of your opponents that they're not expecting.
Yeah, and you know me, I've used a lot of thief decks in like Magic, even in other games like Yu-Gi-Oh! I love stealing my opponent's stuff. So this idea, I'm all for that. I would love to see it and build a deck around it. Yeah. And then we get to more lore loss. And what we mean is like cards like Aladdin, when you play him, your opponent loses lore. Or the other Aladdin with Ship, when he banishes a character through a challenge, your opponents lose 2 lore. Things like that. I would love just to see a whole deck centered around this, and we are seeing a new Hey coming out next week with this new set that also does that by moving to locations. So I feel like this is right around the corner, but I would like to see more, and also kind of control your opponent's lore a little bit as well.
Yeah, this new card, Hey Accidental Explorer, that we just saw, got me excited about this idea. For once, we've got a card that is inkable, kind of like Aladdin. He's the only other inkable option we have so far, really. And to really just have a theme that's based on bringing your opponent down and being a very slow play, probably used in conjunction with a control deck. Ursula is used a lot in this way to, once you're finally at the end, just give you that extra push over the edge. I think it's a really cool theme.
And the last mechanic on our list is Tutors. Now this is something that I am not the biggest fan of. Even when I played Magic the Gathering, I played a lot of Commander, I did not like using Tutors. And the reason is, I kind of like the randomness of trying to get stuff out of your deck. Now, I don't mind stuff like Be Our Guest, where it only looks at the top few of your deck or whatever. But as far as just like, look for any card, put it in your hand, it just puts out combo pieces, and your deck is absolutely 100% consistent almost every single time. That I don't like. I like a little bit of chance, I like a little bit of luck. But yeah, that's just me.
I'm the same way. I prefer to have a deck that is extremely consistent through the entire 60 cards, not that you're fishing for one thing to be a game changer. When it's like that, having these types of decks that are like a one-turn kill, they're just kind of obnoxious to me, that it's in a way trying to break the game, and Tutors really try to break the game, so I'm not a big fan of them.
Alright, and last thing, Disney properties that haven't been introduced that you want to see. So Alex, we'll start with you. What's something that you would like to see in Lorcana, maybe coming out in this next set?
There's still a lot of material left to work with that we still haven't seen yet. We've barely scratched the surface, and I'd really like to see a few characters like Mushu from Mulan that we haven't seen yet. I'd like to see a more powerful Sisu from Raya. I felt like that was a bit underwhelming. And I've always been a huge fan of the movie The Aristocats, so it'd be cool to see some of those cats come into play here. And another one that would just be amazing is Big Hero 6. There's just so many powerful guys in that would be really cool to see their abilities and effects going on.
Yeah, and for me, I think I would like to see, I'm surprised we've actually not seen it yet, is Mowgli. Mowgli from Jungle Book, haven't seen him yet. And another hero in the jungle, Tarzan, we haven't seen him. Monstro from Pinocchio, I thought he was going to be in the second set, Rise of the Floodborn.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, it would be really cool. I like to see him, and we've seen one card of Wreck-It Ralph, and it was an action, so I thought it was going to be an Into the Inklands. As we're recording this, there's still a few more cards they've not spooled yet, so maybe, but it's not really looking like it, so it's kind of surprising. So that's the ones I really can't wait for them to introduce. I mean, there's a lot for them to introduce, and I'm excited for it. So whenever they come out, I'll be even more excited.
Well, that's all for today. What ideas do you have that you hope will come in the future?
Be sure to follow us on social media to keep up to date on the latest Tactical Ink news.
Also, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you can tune in every Friday for a new episode of Tactical Ink. See you next week.